Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on Office 365 data protection and why it's more important now than ever. Some general housekeeping details, just so you're aware. Of course, you are on mute at present, and we would invite you to please use the Q&A window to ask any questions that you have as we go along. We are going to answer them in spoken form at the end of the event, but please go ahead and type them into the Q&A panel anytime they occur to you. And of course, also in the chat window, do let us know if you have any audio or video issues. And for your information, this session is being recorded, and we will send out a link afterward to those of you who attend in case you want to review it again later. So I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Chris Groot is our Vice President of Product Strategy here at SolarWinds, and he's been with the SolarWinds backup product, working with it since its early original launch into the North American MSP market about 10 years ago. And he has a total of more than 16 years experience with software as a service-based businesses, and he really is great at looking for ways to help MSPs make the most of every situation to best serve their customers and to maintain their own business health. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie, and great to be here. Glad everyone could join today, taking the time. And of course, I'm sure most of you or all of you are working from home today, as am I. So when the dog barks or the children are talking in the background, we'll all understand for each other. It's been a great period of time to learn how to adjust. And one more thing I thought I'd add on is, so we're going to run through some of the education pieces here in terms of the importance of Office 365 backup, how that relates into your overall security landscape, and also how you can educate your customers with respect to that. But at the end, if you want to stick around, often we hear that people want to see a quick demo of what the actual product looks like. So no obligation, but after we're through the Q&A and at the very end there, we'll spend 5 minutes if you want to stick around and see what that looks like. All right, so setting this up, the world has changed. I think we all know this, but customers are working remotely outside the firewall. So this was happening before COVID-19, but obviously it's been amplified in a way that's unprecedented. And by the way, kudos to MSPs for helping businesses make this transition. Overall, it has been a huge success, and it couldn't have been done without all of you in the audience. And really, like behind healthcare and basic needs like groceries, the value of connectivity and security with people's reliance on their computers for communication and community, it's never been higher. So so that's been a real big success in my view. One of the drawbacks or risks, of course, though, is that the home network is a much more dangerous place. So it's estimated to be 4 times more polluted. So that brings a whole bunch more responsibilities along with it. In addition to that major transition, the reliance on Office 365 has grown. So we know it's grown by companies. I'm sure within your own companies, you've seen across the SMB space how you've been helping probably your customers adopt. And also within companies, it's been changing. So originally, a lot of the Office 365 was Exchange, and now people are really adopting OneDrive and SharePoint as their primary spot. And that old file server that we used to back up and maintain for companies is becoming less and less important because of that shift. So holistically, we have, as MSPs, we have this role of protecting customer data. It's critical. The way in which we do it, because of these changes, is changing as well. So really adopting to that, understanding the changes in the threat landscape and what our customers truly need is the goal here, so that we can have an intelligent conversation with our customers and provide them with the appropriate level of protection. And just the one piece to add that's really like the contextual to the last 3 weeks is just the amplification from the threats that are coming out there. Gmail, I read a stat yesterday, they get 100 million phishing emails every week, 18% of those now are related to COVID-19, where people are trying to spoof and find different ways in through email or websites. So how do you provide a great service? Well, in terms of educating your customers about the growing threat, there are a number of preventative aspects to an overall layered security perspective. I find that painting a picture like this that really simplifies it, that puts the data at the center, is really helpful for customers to understand that. Moving out from the data though, starting out at the outer edge of the internet, knowing that's where the mail's coming in, that's where people are surfing websites. So things like mail protection and URL filtering uh, are super important, as well as at the network level, the firewall, the log monitoring, very important. Now, without the corporate network in place, though, those certainly we have less control over those. Where we still have a lot of control, though, is with people. So user training is one aspect. Really important is the password management side of things. So 2FA or multi-factor on everything should now be required. It always was a really good idea, but now it's becoming a non-negotiable, as well as educating on password management. So, you know, using your dog's name and the year your daughter was born as your password for 5 or 6 different things is no longer acceptable. Educating people that, you know, the last time Marriott was breached, probably their password, you know, ended up on the dark web and is for sale, and that's how people are attacking their networks. From an app perspective, you know, patch management, it's just you can't take your foot off the patching pedal. It's just fundamental IT hygiene, and that needs to continue. And then lastly, and this is probably one of the more leveraged pieces of from a preventative perspective at the device level, which is antivirus, but really what we see is the high level of adoption of EDR at this point. And that really is enhancing the level of protection at the device level and ultimately protecting that data and helping with the recoverability piece of the equation. So let's take a look at that for a quick sec. So with EDR, rollback's a feature, which is really nice. It can really be a quick answer to ransomware, but also behind that is backup. So like I mentioned, the file server is changing, the data residing with Microsoft is changing, but the need to have a backup of that data is the same as it's always been. So that's where Office 365 really fits in. Behind that, having standby systems in terms of minimizing downtime and being able to recover very quickly, as well as testing that recovery, is all part of that full landscape. So once you paint this full picture for a customer, understanding that you're not just pitching them individual solutions, but an overall strategy of prevention and detection, as well as recoverability, because we all know, despite however, or I guess let's just say, if you put up a 10-foot wall to prevent the bad guys from coming in, it's likely that they're going to build a 12-foot ladder very quickly. So looking at that from the work from home worker perspective, this is like a holistic view of what a sample security package could look like. And so let's just run through it from left to right. Preventing phishing attacks, filtering dangerous web content, providing password management tools for your customers to be able to use, protecting the device with EDR, and then from a recoverability perspective, it's protecting the documents and what we're here to talk about today, which is the Office 365 side of things. I should mention, actually, I think it's today, April 21st, is actually the day that Office 365 has changed its name. So we're all going to have to get used to calling it Microsoft 365 soon. All right, so with respect to Office 365 in particular, then the growth, it's really becoming the de facto standard. So we can see that the adoptions from 2014 to 2018 growing to over 56%. And ultimately, if anything goes wrong with the data inside of there, at this point, your customers are going to be looking to you to help them when they need it most. But the reality is with cloud services, and Microsoft is probably the biggest one that your customers will be using, is that the education may be required. They may not fully understand why backup and security are needed for SaaS-based products. So some of the typical questions in terms of what could possibly go wrong are, my data's in the cloud, doesn't that mean it's already backed up? And being able to provide, an explanation that 1/3 of users have lost data. The primary culprit is accidental deletion. There's other ways to lose data for sure, but certainly people don't realize that once an employee leaves or um, someone covering up their tracks, uh, which leads right into their next question, which is how could I lose data? So yeah, as I was mentioning, an employee leaves and their account is deleted. That's often a place where people end up with gaps in their data and they're searching for it. A file is accidentally deleted and it's not discovered. So although there is a recycle bin that does have a limited lifespan of between 15 and 45 days, then there's a more malicious scenarios of employees that are trying to cover their tracks. So they're deleting emails, they're deleting documents. And potentially there's also someone entering from the outside, i.e. like a hacker or a virus that could also maliciously start deleting information. So having a backup is always a requirement. And ultimately, if you don't, like, what's the risk? Well, like all types of data, just the same as you would protect your Exchange server or your file server, losing valuable data. So customer data, billing data, inventory data, whatever's critical to your business, if that's not available, it can be operationally have a very negative impact. And beyond that, for a lot of companies, there's the regulatory requirements like such as HIPAA, as well as there are certainly times where there's lawsuits or legal requirements with respect to the data where you're going to need that. So my belief in terms of the best way to explain it is demonstrated here. The statement that Microsoft focuses on system availability, and that your role as the MSP, or the responsibility ultimately of the business owner, but you on behalf of them, is really protecting the data that's residing on Microsoft systems. So it's a shared responsibility. And understanding that when things go wrong, that your customers, you can explain to your customers, you're going to call me, you're not going to call Microsoft. So you need to be ready to help, and this is how you're going to do it. So walking through the primary responsibility from what's Microsoft primarily responsible for, what are we as the business owners or the MSP responsible for? It's the data that's residing. What's Microsoft providing in terms of the supporting technology? They do provide the replication, they do provide the recycle bin, but having a copy of that data stored in a different location, having full data retention, extending that to 7 years for email to a year for things like OneDrive and SharePoint is the additional piece in terms of that responsibility. From a security perspective, Microsoft's responsible for all the physical and application level security, but in terms of who actually has accounts and what those people are doing inside those accounts, ultimately that's your responsibility. Microsoft is not going to help you with that. And then last, from a regulatory perspective, their role as the data processor versus your role as the data owner, and just understanding what those differences are. When you paint this picture of the shared responsibility, often that's a light bulb moment for people, and it really helps them understand that you're not just pushing product on them, so to say. You're actually there to provide a critical piece of the overall data security equation. One thing, if you find this helpful, we can share a link, I think maybe in the chat, and in an email that's a follow-up, we'll provide this chart with you with a reusable data sheet so that you can incorporate that if you find that helpful in terms of speaking to your customers. All right, so then in terms of how this gets packaged, or once your customers have bought in on the concept, the how do you bring it to them? Well, there's sort of two paths that we would suggest. One is that first of all, that you build it into a larger security package for, at this juncture, it's the work from home worker, but as things change over 6 months from now, and people potentially will be returning to offices, it is just an overall, appropriate level of security as the threats continue to rise. So when can you incorporate a holistic security package, like filling in the gaps that you already haven't already filled? Well, as part of an annual contract renewal is a great time. So it's potential that at this juncture, you might want to start to push that out a lot faster with your customers and not waiting for them. But we also know at this point that they may not be able to pay. That's everyone's concern. Certainly, the risk of losing revenue is there, and certainly it's a time where we don't want to introduce rising costs for most businesses. So with that uncertainty as the backdrop, we do know a number of customers that are proactively just lowering their margins slightly, but increasing their security posture with their customers, and they're communicating that with their customers so that they're just reinforcing the value that they're providing, and that in turn helps them maintain their revenue with those customers. When it comes time for the annual contract renewal, like setting that expectation that 6 months down the road that there will be costs involved with this additional layers of security that you're adding, that's a great time to set that expectation where that's going to become part of the overall bundle. And then, of course, with any new security bundle contract, making that as something that's just not optional, and it's something that you need to do as part of taking on the responsibility of providing the service. So the concept of like, how does this work economically? Basically, like an end user package like that, if you're already providing a set of services, building on top of that, like what does that look like at an annual contract renewal time frame? Is you can see basically charging $15 to $20 a head, and there's going to be the cost of the software involved, but basically running a 60% margin. It would be a very reasonable approach in terms of how to value that with your customers. And so just shifting gears here, sort of as we get wrapping up, specifically one of the questions we get, there are other options out there in terms of Office 365 backup, and one in particular does SolarWinds provide that's unique and helpful, or that people value in terms of our particular service. For us, it's really around the efficiency and the ease of use, making sure that you don't have to add any extra people to deliver a very streamlined service, that it could be all monitored with a single dashboard. It's incorporated in the same dashboard as the rest of your server workstation backups as well, including the cloud storage, so you don't need to go outside and install any software or provide any storage as part of the equation. Everything is, of course, encrypted, and just providing a simple, low per user price for Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint, so kind of the full suite that just make it very easy to pass on to your customers with no variable pricing involved in terms of sizes of mailboxes, etc. So with that, to wrap up, Office 365 backup, it's really about improving your customer security position. Threats continue to rise. We're at a particularly vulnerable time right now. So setting yourself up to respond to whatever threats come, because ultimately in our market, you are you are protecting people's livelihoods and their legacy. People are driven to build their businesses because they have spouses and children and grandchildren, and many of them have spent 10 or 20 or 30 years building up their legacy, and keeping that legacy out of harm's way is ultimately our purpose. This is the bigger reason of why we do what we do. So with that, I think we have a poll here that we're going to put up on the screen. And Carrie, have we had any questions coming in? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
we have. So if we could go ahead and start the poll. This is just a favor for us. If you wouldn't mind just telling us how valuable you found this content to be. We want to keep always improving and make these webinars more and more valuable. So when you get a chance, if you could please just choose a number there, with 1 being not very valuable at all and 5 being valuable, how you would rate this webinar. I'll give you just a moment to do that. And yes, we do have some questions. One of them was, they asked, how would an MSP sell this kind of protection against OneDrive? And it says KFR. I'm not sure what KFR is. And they're feeling that offering document backup plus Office 365 backup is redundant. So we might need a little clarification there on what we mean by document backup and how that's different from OneDrive.
Sure. Yeah, so document backup. So the reality is that people still are creating documents, and even when they're inside the network and have the file server, as well as especially with devices that are on the move and the working from home scenario, they are still creating documents and spreadsheets and of all sorts that are stored locally on the machine, not on OneDrive. So people don't have perfect data hygiene habits, and so documents is a very, very low cost data backup that actually protects all the Word documents, all the Excel spreadsheets, all the PowerPoints, basically all the business documents that happen to be stored on workstations. So that just complements what is also on Office 365.
Great,
With
thank
respect
you.
to the first part of the question, I'm actually not
Actually,
familiar with.
the questioner clarified and said KFR is known folder redirection, where documents and desktop folders are redirected to OneDrive.
Right. Yeah, so that is one way of handling it. Certainly when people are outside the network, that becomes a little more complicated. And yeah, I guess our observation has been that most people, admittedly, aren't perfect in the way that gets executed. So there's different ways to solve that particular problem. So if that's the way you're handling it, that works as well.
Great. Yeah, we're getting quite a few questions asking if we yet protect Teams, and I've answered a few of them privately to just say it is on the product roadmap. We don't offer it yet today, but it's on the roadmap.
Okay.
Let's see, we've got a few other questions about different things. Let me just scroll through them here. This window is not very large where it shows my questions, so it's taking me a minute to get through them all, but we do have quite a few. Okay, can you elaborate on the pricing structure for MSPs? Is it per user per mailbox cost or per gig cost?
It's per user, so it's a basically, to give you a sense, it'll be adjusted for currency, but basically it's $1.50 US per user. So that is one user covers off Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive.
Yeah, it's quite a competitive price, really, especially when you consider that the cloud storage is included in that price, which a lot of competitors don't. That was another question we got, was how do we compare with some of our competitors? And Chris can go into this in more detail, but one of the big things is that our price includes cloud storage in our more than 30 worldwide data centers, and that's part of your price. It's not a separate contract with a separate vendor. But Chris, what else would you add in terms of that?
Yeah, so really the biggest cost ends up, with solutions that aren't sort of turnkey in this way, is that you end up spending time on them, and ultimately that eats away at the margin. So from a cost perspective, I know we've positioned this at a very or our price point is very, very competitive with what's out there. And we've got customers that have, or domains that have gone up to several thousand. So in terms of scalability or where this fits into the different sizes of customers that you service, it's a great fit for all levels. So when you have one way of doing things, it's standardized. That really brings the efficiency into your business.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question asking about, they understand that this is data backup we're talking about, but they're asking if we provide any way to back up the user's configuration settings.
Yeah, I don't want to hold. So we do capture the configuration settings. I do, I guess, want to call out that I would want to dig into the exact scenario with it, because there's always more to the story, let's say, with those types of questions. So
Yeah,
that's one where I would encourage, like, let's dig in with a sales engineer
yeah, that makes
and
sense.
understand your specifics and make sure that we're answering it 100%
Yeah,
accurately.
absolutely. And this is a good question about retention. Someone's asking, what is the retention period for this backup? Crypto lockers usually take about 3 months to infect. Can you decide what to keep? Can I keep one backup that's a year old and one that's 6 months old in addition to more recent backups? I think that goes to recovery points, right? And retention?
Yeah. So actually, so we've again, in the spirit of simplicity, we've tried to kind of overshoot on all those things. So with Exchange, with the email, the default setting is 7 years. With OneDrive and SharePoint, the default retention is 1 year. So we'll be running with Exchange 6 backups per day typically, with OneDrive and SharePoint 4 times per day. So with you'll have a recovery point at each of those points for the full retention period.
Excellent. We have another question about reporting and notification options. How do folks get reports and notifications about Office 365 backup completion and
Sure.
status?
Yeah, we can touch on this once we, after the Q&A here. We're going to jump into the product briefly, as I mentioned off the top, if you want to stick around. But one of the nice parts is that you can actually, set a schedule in terms of an email report, have a summary of all your customers in a single report that gets delivered on whatever schedule and to whichever individuals you select. So it's very flexible with respect to seeing that.
Great. Okay, we've got a lot of questions here that I'm wading through. Reporting we talked about. Is Office 365 backup available in the SolarWinds RMM backup integration? And that's another one that I actually know the answer to. If you are using the integrated version in N-Central, yes, it is. If you're using the one in RMM, it is not at this point. So in that option, if you're using RMM and you want Office 365, you can use the what we call the standalone instance of backup to get that capability. This is a good one here for you, Chris. Can the speaker address the security of backup data at rest? Who has access to the encryption key? And can SolarWinds support staff see the backup data?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so whenever data is being recovered, it requires the domain credentials be entered from Office 365. So we don't actually store for the backups that's running, but if you ever want to be able to view data, we've got the security to not allow anyone except for the person that can actively enter the password to be able to recover any data. Great question. That's an important one to understand.
Yeah, definitely. This is someone asking, they say, I have several small boutique clients spread across, different companies. And what is the minimum licensing requirement for a small reseller or MSP?
Well, the very minimum is one.
That's good price.
You can actually select users. So if you had a company of 10 and for whatever reason you didn't want to, you only wanted to protect 2 people, that is actually an option. And you can also specify whether it's just for Exchange or whether it's across all 3. So the flexibility is there in any direction, and there's no minimum on a per company basis.
That's great. Another question, is there a cost for protecting shared mailboxes and team sites?
So the answer to shared mailboxes is no, like no additional cost, it's just included. And then team sites, as mentioned earlier, We don't fully support Teams yet. That's something we're actively working on. So that's
Yep,
something to look forward to.
that sounds good. This is an interesting one. This is kind of going back to some of the points you were making earlier about the need for this type of product. Someone's saying, I have a client that only uses Exchange online, not sure why they would need additional backup. So maybe we could just recap some of those scenarios where the Microsoft recycle bin is not going to be enough.
Yeah, well, I guess probably the two scenarios that come up most frequently are one is when you've got turnover in employees and whether those users are being deleted or not, um, and having access to that data for extended like 7-year period. And then the other one is the either accidental or potentially malicious or intentional deleting of emails that would be in the spirit of covering one's tracks. So, if you're receiving or information that perhaps you shouldn't have, um, once you delete that, it is going to stay in the recycle bin for a period of time. I think 45 days would be the maximum. And then after that, there would be no more evidence from Microsoft that you or anyone could recover. And so at that point, that's really where having access to those old emails become really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. This is someone who's been following us for a little while, and they're asking what restrictions there are in these backups. They're remembering back to when we were in beta. At one point, we only protected Exchange, and we did not yet do OneDrive and SharePoint, which we now do. So I guess they're asking if there are any additional restrictions, and the only thing I can think about is what you've already mentioned, that we don't fully protect Teams yet, but it is on the roadmap, and we do now protect SharePoint, Exchange, and OneDrive.
Yeah, I guess so. In terms of is there any restrictions? Probably another direction that people might have questions about is like, is there any usage limits in terms of like gigs or like amount of data or anything like that? And the simple answer is that it's up to, or yeah, included with every license is 1 terabyte per user. So basically, we've overshot the average user by more than 10 times. And so our belief is that's essentially unlimited, but we did ultimately put an upper limit on, at which point if someone is passing an average of a terabyte per user, because that's a shared pool, at that point we're going to be kind of curious and want to ask some questions.
Yeah. It's interesting. Is the backup account supporting modern authentication or basic authentication? I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. Some of these, if we're not able to answer them adequately, like Chris said, we'll put you in touch with an SE that can get more into technical detail. There's one person that did post quite a lengthy, very specific example, and I don't want you to think we're ignoring you, but I do think that's best suited probably to a one-on-one conversation afterward.
Sure, yeah, happy to do that. And Carrie, I'm sure you can provide that, and we'll
Yep.
bring in myself as well as our deep product experts and make sure that we get the right answer on those specific questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
On the
I'll just
sample pricing model, I'm sorry, one more question. On the sample pricing model that you showed, they're wanting to understand what we're referring to when we say backup docs and site and what those products are. So again, maybe that's something we should follow up with individually, because those are, we talked a little bit about backup documents. Site is part of our password management product, which is not something we talked about on this webinar, but it is part of securing your home-based workers. Can backups be restricted to data centers in Canada? As a Canadian, Chris, I think you're the perfect one to answer this.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, so everything is geolocated. So if you are in Canada, it will default to Canada for you. Same thing with the US and all the European countries, etc. So yeah, everything is geo-homed all the time.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we've got a few more, but a lot of them are getting to be very specific, and maybe we should follow up one-on-one. So, Chris, if you want to do a quick demo, if those who have are interested in staying for the demo. Oh, another
Sure.
thing too, I forgot to mention is if you are interested in follow-up beyond what you're seeing here, please type contact in the chat or the Q&A window, and that will let us know that you do want to follow up and get some more specific answers than we've been able to provide here today. So just
Yeah,
hit
for sure.
contact.
I think that's really valuable just to know that we do have sales engineers available. So like if you want to have just a technical conversation and a drive through and understand, your specific questions, as well as an overview of how things work, we are more than pleased to spend that time. And generally, that's where a lot of the benefits do pop out. So yeah, on the screen here, I'll just highlight a couple of things. So this is the overall dashboard for backup that you'd see when using SolarWinds Backup. It is a place where you can cover off your workstations and servers as well as Office 365, so it's integrated into one view. But specific to Office 365, all of these donut charts, etc., you can always click on the portion that you're most interested in. So in this case, Office 365, or on the left-hand side, we also have a specific view related to Office 365. So with that available, then from there, you can drill down. You can see the last 28 days of backups and exactly what's been, if there have been any issues. So we can see if we drop down to the second last row here, we can see that Exchange has been successful for the last 28 days, but there's actually been no OneDrive or SharePoint backup. So that's user configured. And same thing here, we can see for SharePoint that this particular domain is not protecting SharePoint, but it is protecting OneDrive and Exchange. Clicking into any particular device, then you can drill into the details for the number of protected users. So you can see that at every level. You can drill down and see more detail on who those users are for every particular plugin. And also digging into, we note both the shared and the regular mailboxes in this view as well. From a historical perspective, you can see the success or duration of every single backup as it happens. So we've got a listing of that duration, the data source, when it was started, etc. So really, really detailed view with respect to what's happening. Some really nice usability features like automatically adding new accounts that are added to the domain, automatically adding them into the backup. And you can filter out whatever information you want to see at any point. So that's really great. Keeps things really simple. Adding a domain is just a matter of clicking on our add button. Once you click on add, you're given the option of servers and workstations where you're actually going to deploy an agent. Or with Office 365, it's just a matter of adding in your domain credentials. So you're creating that domain name, you're selecting what you want to add in, you connect, you select your accounts, and then that domain is now running. And then I guess two more things just to touch on real quick is with respect to a restore side of things. You're going to just come under the particular domain and decide what type of restore that you're going to run. When you go to restore, once again, it's going to ask you to connect to your domain. So that is a requirement, and that just adds in an extra layer of security to make sure that people are not restoring without appropriate levels of access credentials. And the last thing I was going to touch on was the reporting side of things. So once again, coming to our Office 365 view here, over on the right side is where we have an option to always email views. So if you wanted to create a scheduled delivery, let's say for your internal purposes, you could add a schedule. You can specify who the recipients are going to be. So you can add in a new recipient, or you may have other people that you've already set up as a user in your account. You can select the exact view that you want to have. You can create custom views as well as these predefined views that are kind of optimized for what most people would want. And then you can decide that what days you want to deliver it, receive it on, and let's say you want to have it at 9 a.m. just as you're arriving into your home office. Once you set that up, you can save that view, or you have the option to send yourself that view, and it's going to just provide you exactly what you see on the screen here, so that you know whether or not there's anything to be looking at. So I think with all that said, the summary is you can set it up in about 5 minutes if you want to test it. With respect to the rest of the features, it's all something that can be learned in just a matter of a few minutes. So it's really, really simple and straightforward.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to everyone who joined us. As mentioned, if we did not get to your specific question, we'll follow up afterward. And if you would like some more information about the product or about any of these topics, just please type contact into the chat window and we'll definitely follow up with you. So thank you again for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.